Beneath the marble glory of ancient Rome, terror lurked in the shadows. For millions of slaves, every day brought the threat of pain, humiliation, or death. Roman punishments ranged from routine violence to gruesome spectacles that would chill even modern audiences. But what did these punishments look like? And just how far would Roman masters go to maintain their power? Today, we'll immerse in the astonishingly brutal world of Roman slave punishments. Rome ran on slave labor, outnumbering citizens in some cities. In a world obsessed with order, discipline was enforced with terror. The law offered almost no protection. A slave could be punished for almost anything, major or minor. But it's the methods and their sheer cruelty that truly shock. The tools of everyday terror: flogging and beatings. The whip, the rod, and the lash. These were ever-present reminders of the master's control. Slaves could be beaten for being slow, making mistakes, or simply angering their owner. Flogging was public and humiliating, sometimes performed in front of the household or even at city crossroads to serve as a warning. Ancient historian Seneca wrote, "The slave is punished at the moment his master's wrath commands." Sometimes lashes rain down for a yawn, a cough, or an untimely silence. Some estates maintained a special room, the ergastulum, not just for detaining but for punishing. Here, beatings were routine. One archaeological dig revealed iron collars and shackles, vivid reminders of the violence inside. Branding, the mark of the runaway. For those who tried to escape, Roman punishments were both brutal and permanent. The most infamous was branding. Captured runaways, servi fugitivi, were forced to endure the searing pain of a hot iron pressed against their skin, most often on the forehead. The letters fug, fugitivus, meaning runaway, or the name or initials of their master, would be forever scorched into their flesh. Sometimes branding was done in the town square, turning their punishment into a public lesson. This mark was more than just a scar. It was a symbol of shame and ownership. Branded slaves could never hide their status again. The burn was a warning to others. Escape would only bring greater suffering. Ancient sources describe branding as a common practice, especially in large households or estates with many field slaves. Pliny the Elder remarked on the disturbing normality of meeting men and women whose faces bore the scars of hot iron, a walking advertisement of their owner's power. Branding wasn't just physical torment, it was a lifelong sentence to humiliation, suspicion, and harsher treatment with every encounter. In Rome, even freedom could not erase the scar, making branding one of the most feared and psychologically devastating punishments a slave could endure. Mutilation and torture, permanent lessons in obedience. For slaves who repeated offenses or attempted escape, Roman punishments could be shockingly brutal. Mutilation was a favored method. Owners might order the cutting off of ears or the slitting of noses, creating visible and lifelong marks of shame. In especially harsh cases, Achilles' tendons were severed to cripple slaves permanently, preventing any hope of future flight. Torture was also common, both as punishment and as a way to force confessions. Overseers might burn slaves with heated metal, pour vinegar or oil into open wounds, or suspend them painfully by their limbs for hours. Some slaves were forced into heavy iron collars fitted with spikes, ensuring constant pain. These methods weren't just about discipline, they were public warnings. The physical scars, public humiliation, and psychological trauma reminded everyone. In Rome, challenging the system could mean losing far more than freedom. For many slaves, mutilation and torture were the most feared punishments of all. Psychological punishments and degradation. Public humiliation. For Roman slaves, punishment often extended far beyond physical pain. Public humiliation was a powerful tool for control. Slaves might be paraded through crowded streets wearing placards that described their crimes in detail, subjected to jeering and insults from onlookers. Some were forced to wear outlandish or degrading clothing, their heads shaved or faces smeared with soot to intensify their shame. At times, a slave's hands would be tied behind their back, or they'd be made to stand motionless in a busy marketplace, exposed to the ridicule of all. This spectacle not only broke the spirit of the individual, but served as a chilling lesson to others. Defiance would be met with disgrace. In Rome, reputation mattered deeply. Even those with no status could be left utterly destroyed by public scorn. Isolation and starvation, silent suffering. Roman slave punishment could also involve deliberate isolation and deprivation. Slaves who angered their masters or broke minor rules might be locked away in dark, cramped cells, often underground ergastula, where little light or fresh air reached. Alone and forgotten, they were left for days or even weeks, their only company the constant echo of their own fears. Food and water were strictly rationed, sometimes reduced to stale bread and a sip of water. This slow starvation weakened their bodies and minds, making them more submissive upon release. Isolation stripped away all sense of community and hope, while hunger broke the will. For many slaves, these silent sentences, endured in darkness and solitude, were as terrifying as any public beating or torture, reminding them that punishment in Rome could be both visible and unseen. Punishment by labor, the living dead. Mines and quarries, a death sentence. For the gravest offenses, Roman slaves could be condemned to the mines or stone quarries, a punishment described by ancient writers as worse than execution. Chained in darkness far underground, slaves labored from dawn to dusk, breaking rocks with rudimentary tools in suffocating heat and choking dust. Food was scarce, injuries common, and diseases rampant. Overseers enforced discipline with brutal whips, and many slaves were forced to work naked, their bodies wasting away from exhaustion and malnutrition. Escape was nearly impossible, with guards patrolling every entrance. Life expectancy in the mines was measured in months, not years. Few ever emerged alive. For those sentenced to this fate, the mines were not just a form of punishment, they were a slow, agonizing death, serving as a grim warning to all who considered defying their masters. Rowing in the galleys. For many condemned slaves, a sentence to the Roman galleys was as good as a death sentence. Chained side by side to massive wooden benches, rowers labored relentlessly to the harsh rhythm of a taskmaster's drum. The stifling, cramped air was thick with sweat and desperation, made worse by the screams of overseers and the ever-present threat of the lash. Slaves received barely enough food and water to survive, and rest was a luxury. Many slept where they sat, shackled to the oars. Disease and infection spread quickly in such conditions, and injuries from both rowing and punishment often went untreated. Most would never see freedom or land again. The galleys became both their prison and their grave. For those sentenced to row, the sea offered no escape, only endless toil and the slow erosion of body and hope. Agricultural ergastula. On remote Roman estates, the agricultural ergastulum was a prison disguised as a workplace. These stone or underground buildings were designed to confine the hardest laboring slaves, often those considered rebellious or at risk of escape. Inside, slaves slept in chains or heavy iron collars, packed tightly on straw or bare earth after days spent toiling in the fields under a burning sun. Guards and fierce dogs patrolled the perimeter, making escape nearly impossible. Meals were meager and punishment for the slightest mistake was swift, with whippings or further confinement in the darkness of the ergastulum. The constant fear and exhausting conditions broke many in body and spirit. Isolated from the outside world, the ergastulum was purpose-built to suppress hope and resistance, transforming the agricultural landscape into a brutal system of control and suffering. Death as spectacle, Rome's most extreme punishments. Crucifixion. Crucifixion was the ultimate Roman punishment, reserved for the worst slave offenses, especially rebellion or killing a master. After a brutal flogging, the condemned slave was forced to carry a heavy wooden cross through jeering crowds, then nailed or tied to it and left exposed on the roadside or hilltop. The agony was both physical and psychological. Victims suffocated slowly under their own weight, sometimes lingering for days as public spectacles. Crucifixions were arranged in highly visible places, sending a chilling message to other slaves about the cost of defiance. The most infamous example came after the Spartacus revolt, when thousands of slaves were crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies lining the road for miles. In Rome, crucifixion was not just execution, it was a lesson in terror, crafted to break spirits and secure the absolute authority of masters. Damnatio ad bestias, thrown to the beasts. One of the most terrifying punishments reserved for slaves was damnatio ad bestias, being thrown to wild animals in the arena. Condemned slaves were led into the amphitheater before crowds of jeering spectators, often unarmed or bound to stakes. Then hungry lions, leopards, or bears were released to attack them. The spectacle was a public warning. Absolute obedience was expected, and defiance could mean a slow, violent death for the entertainment of others. Some were forced to fight back with only wooden sticks, while others were left completely helpless. The terror and agony of facing wild beasts alone ensured this punishment became infamous throughout the empire. For Roman audiences, it was brutal amusement. For slaves, it was one of the most dreadful ends imaginable, painful, public, and utterly devoid of mercy. Poena cullei, the sack of death. Among the most bizarre and dreadful Roman punishments was poena cullei, the penalty of the sack. Reserved for slaves accused of killing their masters, this punishment was a gruesome public spectacle. The condemned was sewn inside a large leather sack along with several live animals, a dog, a snake, a rooster, and a monkey. Once the terrified group was sealed inside, the sack was thrown into a river or the sea. Struggling in absolute darkness, the victim endured panic and attack from the animals as they all slowly drowned together. The mix of fear, confusion, and violence was intended as a terrifying warning. Romans believed such a crime violated the natural order so profoundly that even death alone was not enough. The bizarre ordeal of the sack was to erase the criminal from both society and memory. Mass execution. Mass execution was one of Rome's most chilling displays of power, often used as collective punishment for slave insurrection or crimes against masters. When a master was murdered, Roman law could demand the deaths of all household slaves, regardless of innocence. The most infamous case occurred in 61 CE, after the murder of the senator Pedanius Secundus. Over 400 slaves from his household were executed, sparking shock and debate even among Roman citizens. Mass executions were public spectacles intended to instill fear, crush potential rebellion, and reinforce absolute authority. For slaves, these events were inescapable reminders that under Roman law, collective fate mattered more than justice for the individual. The punishments faced by Rome's slaves were marked by a chilling inventiveness. They reveal a society obsessed with control, willing to use every tool, torture, humiliation, spectacle, to maintain the ancient pecking order. Remember, Rome's civilization was built on more than roads and temples. It was built on fear. If you found this deep dive surprising or shocking, subscribe for more unfiltered history and let us know what ancient truth you'd like revealed next.